So I want to thank the organizers for including me in the program. And I was expecting to have 10 people left in the room at this time. So thanks for also sticking around. I'm a macroeconometrician. So what that means is that I analyze time series macroeconomic data. So time series analysis is usually asymptotic theory. So to give you some background how I got from analyzing data to big data to massive data, I'm going to walk you through what we are after as a macroeconomist and how I got to this 4 terabytes of data that has been keeping me very busy the last year or so. Okay. So in economic time series analysis, we usually think of a series as having several components. One is a trend component. The trend part arises because the economy grows. So it's in 1940, GDP is gross national product. Okay, so output income per capita is a few $1,000, and now it's $40,000. Okay. The second piece is the cycle, which is really what I'm interested in. Okay? And there's also a seasonal component. Okay? So people travel in the summer. There's more demand for gasoline because people drive around. And the last piece is irregular component. It's all sorts of funny stuff that we have no explanations for. Okay? So as a macroeconomist, I'm really interested in the second piece that I call C. Okay? That's a cycle part. Okay? But all I observe is just the data. Okay? And I have to clean out all the other stuff before I can make any what's called business cycle analysis. Okay? So in relation to the talk that you just heard, okay, high frequency data in a frequency domain is the high frequency components with fast turnover. Okay? Trend component are the low frequency variations. Okay? So what we call a business cycle are all the variations with periodicity between 6 and 32 quarters. Okay? This means that the variations that will recur between 6 quarters, which is less than a year, to as many as 8 years. The difficulty in business cycle analysis is that what we really want to do is to look at the cyclical variations in the economy, but there's no precise definition of economic activity. Okay? So we have to find all sorts of variables that we think are indicators of the economy. Okay? So in the past, this indicator is narrowed to just a handful of variables, 2, 3, 4. Okay? So in the last 10 years or so, we have got to what we thought was big, and big for us means couple hundred variables. Okay? So I'm going to walk you through a little bit how the big data buys us something, and big conventional data, to what I think is interesting in that we now have massive data in the terabytes of very high frequency data, but unconventional in other sense because they are no longer prepared by the government. They are provided as transactions goes along. Okay? So back to this business cycle component I want to extract. Okay? So what are some facts we know? Well, the definition of a business cycle is that these are fluctuations. They have non-uniform periodicity. It's between 8 and 32 quarters, so this is a broad spectrum. There's no fixed amplitude. Okay? But what's interesting, it has strong co-movement, okay? Meaning that the various variables all move together, more or less move together. And this is true not just within the US, even across countries, in the Eurozone, in Canada, in Asia. When we have a business cycle, when we have a downturn, the world has a downturn. It's not specific to the US. Okay? I mention these facts to you because it helps us understand why I'm interested in what you're interested in. And these movements, they are pervasive. They happen not just in a particular state, California. They happen all across the country in all different industries and regions. Okay? So these are official business cycle dates. It's also interesting to mention that in the US, what is called a recession is declared by a group of 8 smart people sitting in a room, and they tell us we're in a recession. Okay? In the UK, for example, a recession is defined as 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth. But in the US, from Second World War onwards, we have 11 recessions. And this column, 1, 2, 3, 4, the fourth column tells us how many months the recession lasts, and this is what I meant by not totally regular. Okay? Some recessions last for as short as 6 months, such as in the 1980s, and some last as long as 16 months. Okay? So the latest recession, the one in 2007, lasts 15 months. Okay? So this is a picture of inflation and employment. Okay? The shaded area are what this group of 8 people told us we are in a recession. They highlight for us the dates. Okay? So you see the 2010, that's the one that the Lehman Brothers collapse. That's the most recent one. Okay? So what you see here is that when there are peaks, okay, peak in unemployment is the blue line, that lines up well with what is declared to be a recession. Okay? So this happens not just in inflation and employment data, it also happens in, this is a picture of housing permits, okay, housing stocks. Okay? When the economy is bad, the housing industry collapses, and this is particularly bad in the 2007 and 8 recession because of the housing problem. Okay? So you might wonder why am I interested in this? Okay? So what you see here is that the cycle, we go up, we go down. Okay? So I'm a macroeconomist, so I'm interested, if I'm in a policymaker, I would be interested in turning points. Okay? I want to know where the economy is at this time and where the economy is going. Okay? So often we think about forecasts, but actually we don't even know where the economy is now. Okay? Because the data we get from the government, for example today, so the data for the second quarter, which is where we are now, we don't get this data until in the third quarter, if not the fourth quarter, if the data get revised. Okay? So we want to learn about the state of the economy now, which is called nowcasting, and we want to learn about the future, which is called forecasting. Okay? So I'm speaking like I'm the government because I worked in the central bank before going to graduate school. But you can see private sector consulting firms, they may also be interested in this kind of information to help investors, for example, to do risk management. Okay? So in a nutshell, when I say I want to do business cycle analysis, I'm really trying to learn about where we are in this business cycle and where we are going. Okay? So traditionally means up to about 1990. Okay? When we want to learn about the business cycle, we would look at a handful of variables: inflation, unemployment, the usual suspects. Okay? In the mid-90s, there's a group of people that realized that, well, we have lots more data than just a handful of variables. Why don't we use more information? Okay? So for us, big data then, and I was fairly involved in this work, means I developed the asymptotic theory that allows the sample size, T is the number of time series observations, and N is the number of variables I monitor, that I allow both N and T to be large. Okay? So large for us, in a practical sense, is just a couple hundred variables. Okay? So that is still a major improvement over what we had learning a few variables, because if you only look at the labor market, okay, unemployment, okay, the labor market may collapse, but housing market may be good. So you cannot call the economy, call the state, just looking at one particular sector. So we're looking for something broad-based. Okay? So why do I think this? You might be interested in this because the definition of the business cycle is co-movements. Okay? Co-movements means all the variables move together. So for your terminology, these would be the low-rank components. I'm looking for low-rank components. Okay? Because a group of variables have variations like this. Okay? So when we move from the data, which is a few series, to the big data, all I'm changing is really the asymptotic theory. But the data is still perfectly manageable on my laptop computer. Nothing changes, and the government provides for me the data, the government being the census, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and they're all cleaned. Okay? Cleaned meaning that somebody has removed for me all the seasonal variations, all the irregular stuff, and all I need to do is to download the 200 variables for 600 months or quarters, however the frequency comes in, and I only have to extract this component. Okay? So that was pretty straightforward. So So I would have this data, maybe 200 series. I can estimate factor models along the lines of what was just discussed. Okay? But factor models of principal components don't always have a good interpretation. So I might also want to select a handful of variables among the 200 to focus on. And this is something I started considering using column selection, and they work very well. As far as I can tell, nobody has investigated these column selection methods in this context, but I think that's is promising. Okay? Now, when I say big data theory, this is work that I was involved in. What we try to get at is a proof that we'll try to model the data, which is X, represented using a factor representation. Okay? And then what we try to show is that if I estimate the factors by principal components, which is the guy called F hat, okay, it deviates from the latent factor, which I don't see, which is Ft, by a rotation, and that this difference, okay, is small in some well-defined sense. Okay? So this is the asymptotic theory stuff that we do. Okay? So why do I care about this asymptotic theory? Because after I estimate this F, okay, by F hat, okay, I need some standard error bands around this estimate, so I want to, so that I can say with some degree of precision of where I am with respect to the state of the economy. Okay? So an example would be like this. Okay? So I have this is the first factor extracted from the 200 series. Okay? So I wasn't able to get the shaded area up on this graph. So you see, this is very similar to what I showed you earlier. That this method of principal components picks up for me the date that there was a recession in 1980. That is the deepest recession we have since Second World War, and there's a humongous recession in 2009. So it does a very good job extracting for us the state of the economy. So what I don't like, though, about this data is that the government provides for us GDP, but the data itself is being estimated. Okay? There's no, you can't go out and say that's GDP. It's not like that. The government has to go out, estimate consumption, investment, add everything up, and they call it GDP. And the data is not available for us in a timely basis. Okay? However, and there are other technical details about how long you want the data to be. But the good thing about this data is that the government cleans everything for us. Okay, so as I said earlier, all I need to do is to download the data and I estimate this factor and I'm done. Okay, so what was presented to me last year was so my colleague who was being consulted by the government on how to use high frequency data to better improve our measure of prices. Told me he had 4 terabytes of data, and I'm the big data person in my field. So I said, well, if you are into big data, why don't you take a look at this data? This is really big. And then I realized, okay, this is really big because this is massive. So what I have here is scanner data. It's really data that has, when you go to a supermarket or mass merchandise company, everything that went through a scanner, I have that data. Okay? Now what makes this data unique is that it really collects for me unit price, it collects for me quantity. It no longer is data being estimated by somebody. It actually is purchases. Okay? So it is very exciting from an economic standpoint because we never have data for transaction prices. Okay? And it is also available on a weekly basis, okay? Whereas the data that the government gave us is available on a quarterly basis. It's national accounts data. Okay? So that's the good. Okay? And GDP is for the whole economy. This data is collected for 20 metropolitan areas, okay? Across the country. So I also have the geographical dimension. Okay? Now sometimes more is not necessarily good because business cycle analysis is about aggregate variations. This data gives me every fine detail, and the example I like is my toy my toy data set is the eggs. Okay, so I always thought go to the supermarket, you buy medium A, group, large X, small X, and that's it. But this data, which is based on barcode, I have 4 gigabytes of eggs with thousands of barcodes. Okay? So farm eggs, organic eggs, they all counted as different eggs. So from a business cycle perspective, that's too much detail, so I'm going to have to aggregate them up. Okay? So I spend a lot of time trying to get to the data in some manageable dimension. Okay? So I was given this data, and at the same time, I was asked to give an invited lecture on big data. So I naively thought I would be able to use this as an experiment to see what we can say about business cycles from this data, because this data is really interesting because it's from 2006 and 2010, and the financial crisis is right in there, and it's weekly. So in principle, I should be able to say, well, Lehman Brothers collapsed in March 2008. So what happens to people's purchases? I thought I should be able to do that. Okay? So I got the data, and I won't tell you how big of a nightmare was to get the data up onto the Columbia server, because this is also proprietary data. I can't store it anywhere else. So to cut a long story short, I have this data. What I have in data form is a matrix. Columns are the UPCs, and the rows are the time. I have 260 weeks, okay? And I want to extract the principal component or the common variations from this data. Okay? So that was my goal. I just want to extract the common variations from the data. Okay? So what I have is price, I have quantity, and I have price times quantity, which is value, okay? Which is the actual sales. Okay? And I try methods that were developed by people in this room, the random projections. I try leverage scores, and I do the columns, and I do all that. But it turns out that, so what I'm walking you through is I don't have constructive output that I can show you. What I have are questions that I was unable to solve, that I think gives an interesting dialogue given the purpose of this conference. Okay. So the first issue I want to bring up is, so I'm interested in extracting this vector, okay? And with data set of this dimension, I turn to algorithms. That is the reason why I turn to algorithms, because my traditional approach kind of wasn't very useful in this kind of environment. So if I and all this stuff on algorithms is self-taught, so I might not have learned it perfectly. So the error rate for me, from my reading of it, is usually stated something like in the top line. Okay? But my statistical training usually gives me result like something in the middle of the page. Okay? So I need to translate that error rate into something in the middle. Okay? So until I can make that translation, it becomes very hard to convince my colleagues that I'm doing something interesting. Okay? So I kind of need to tell people, okay, this is what the algorithmic people tell me is good, but they want me to explain it in the context of what they're used to seeing. So what we're used to seeing is a statement, something like in the middle of the page, that says, if I estimate the factors using a matrix with k columns instead of n columns, okay, the error rate is small. Okay? Not that I'm interested in a matrix A relative to a matrix approximated by k columns. Okay? So I'm really interested in the what is extracted out from this matrix rather than the matrix itself. Okay? And that I have not been able to find the mapping from the result that is available in the algorithmic literature to something more statistical. So if anybody has insights to share, I would really greatly appreciate it. Okay? So that's issue one, which I call statistics versus algorithmic result. Okay? And the second aspect is this. Okay? So when I try to sample the data from this gigantic matrix into a smaller matrix that I analyze, I have a matrix A, I know how to do that. Okay, so I have a matrix A for price, I have a matrix A for quantity, and I have one for value. Okay? But these are not three independent matrices, okay? Especially value equals to price times quantity. Okay? When price goes up, quantity is going to go down. Okay? So I should not be sampling the three matrices separately. Okay? So I have not found a way or discussion in papers I've read that guides me how to sample matrices jointly. Okay? So, so I have several thoughts how to do this, but I have no proof for anything that is optimal. One thing I think of is sample certain columns from P, certain columns from Q, and certain columns from V, and then stack everything back up. Okay. The other way I can think of doing it is stack P, Q, and V into one very tall matrix, and then sample the columns. Okay. So how we do this, the issue really is how do I do the sampling when the data matrices are not independent. Okay? So here I'm really trying to bring some statistics back into the algorithms, because that's the way my data are, and most of our data is actually of this nature. They're not totally independent, and I cannot sample it without regards to the other variables that I have to look at. The third issue I want to consider, I want to bring up is, so I understand how to do random projection sampling. I also understand how to do CUR, and I sample them. And I got this nice looking importance distribution, and I know it's optimal in some well-defined sense. But if I simply follow this importance sampling distribution, I'm not making use of my economic information. Okay? So for example, if I do this non-uniform sampling, I may not get a representative set of firms from different locations. Okay? So I have other constraints, economic constraints, that I want to incorporate in this sampling exercise. Say, I need size distribution of firms, I need geographical representation, I need income distribution. So in some sense, I have a numerical distribution from which to sample, but I want to put constraints such that some other information, not just distribution, is incorporated in the sampling procedure. Okay? So this is the third aspect of it, that as I move along, I feel I learn a lot from these algorithms, but they're not quite ready for doing what I need. Yeah? The last aspect of it, I think, is what makes the big data appealing. The high frequency of it, the heterogeneity of it, is also what gives me the tremendous headache. And the issue here really is that this is unconventional data. Okay? It's a private sector collecting the data. There's no more government cleaning the data for me. I'm now the data cleaner. Okay? So an example would be like this. Okay? So the top graph is a beer, quantity of beer, units of beers sold. Okay? So beer sales is very seasonal. Okay? So you can see all these spikes happening. That's July 4th. Okay? So that beer, it is July 4th. Okay? So, and if you look at wine, okay, wine has a different seasonality pattern. Wine sales peaks during Thanksgiving and Christmas. Okay? So, so on top of it, there is Thanksgiving, Black Friday effect. Okay? There's sales effect where you know, supermarket sales, you buy Coke, right? We stock up on Pepsi when it's on sale, and then the price goes back when it, you know. So we're not interested. That's not the type of variation we're interested in. But we need to clean. I need to clean it before I can actually get to my cyclical component. Okay. So without the luxury of having the government to clean all this seasonal stuff, and this is a hard problem even for one series, let alone a billion of series. The reason is that all these Thanksgiving effect, Easter effects, they are not exactly periodic. Okay, because we are in a Gregorian calendar. Easter doesn't happen on exactly the same day every year. Thanksgiving is not on exactly the same day. So unlike monthly data, I cannot difference them away. Okay? So that the high frequency data, highly heterogeneous data, gives me tremendous headache. Okay? So I played around it for a long time. So actually there's a whole agency in the government that do these seasonal variation, and I'm one person doing the seasonal variation. So I just find the simplest way, fast, not necessarily optimal, but that works. Okay? So what I did was I basically put sine and cosine dummies, get rid of the seasonal stuff, and I picked up some holidays. I cleaned all the series using regressions, and I thought I cleaned all the series, and then I aggregate everything up. And then I realized that after I aggregate everything up, these seasonal components reappear. Okay? The reason is when I clean it at the individual series level, the aggregate doesn't, it could still have the seasonal effect. Okay? So this is actually not working. So after 1 year of figuring this out, I now realize that one of the better ways to handle the seasonal component is actually to treat seasonality itself as a low-rank component and let principal component do its own work. Right? So I think I was getting more mileage out of it. So this, you can see from that graph, until you remove those seasonal variations, you cannot think about any business cycle variation. So what I tried in this exercise was the top graph is just raw data. And what I tried to do is to use principal components to remove those seasonal variations. And I ended up with the second graph, okay, which you can see still has the spikes, but not quite as pronounced. Okay? And then if I go one step further, take the second row, and then do a month-to-month, 12-month differencing, then I get rid of most of the seasonal variation. Okay, so what I'm trying to get at here is when we have algorithms work really well when everything is very organized and relatively structured and systematic. My data is very heterogeneous, so the algorithms get me quite a distance in some dimensions, but there's a lot of pre-processing I need to do. I need some kind of learning algorithm that I can train get rid of all these seasonal variation on a series by series basis, because these effects are not really regular. Okay? The final thing is I learned a lot about these robust principal components and all that, but I'm still having a very hard time. So for example, if I have a 240 by 10 matrix, should I expect to get a reasonable estimate of a low rank component? So I get all these bounds, but I have not, this is probably my major challenge. I've not been able to translate it back into comfortable statements that I can tell others I have a precise estimate of this low rank component. So, to sum up, what I started out doing was to experiment, use this 4 terabytes of data as a testing framework to see how far what are the business cycle variations I can learn from this data, because if I can extract some interesting business cycle variations, it is potentially very interesting. It is high frequency, it is weekly, it has information that the official data does not have. So if I can extract relevant information, it is potentially a very interesting way of doing macroeconomic research. So what I found is I learned a lot of methods. I think that is a great starting point, but that there's actually a lot of interesting work that needs to be done before I can get to, I can comfortably explain to the die-hard time series econometricians that go by asymptotic theory, because it's two different ways of doing it. But probably the main source of the problem is that we're now looking at unconventional data, and I have to take on the job of doing a lot of work that is traditionally not our job. So the big data comes with just a different can of worms, if you like. So this is kind of my experience working with this data. So if anybody has ideas how to do the sampling, taking into account the issues that the variables are not being independent, incorporating certain constraints, I would really appreciate hearing from you. You can reach me by email, because there are not many people in my field using these kind of methods, so I'm kind of doing it on my own. But I think there's promise in this kind of work. So thanks for listening.